Welcome back to Newcastle Central. This is part 3 of building the switch panel. So if you haven't been following along, this is kind of what we're moving our way towards here. So in part 1, which you can get to clicking on the link on the top of the corner of the video right now, part 1 was putting together this front part of the panel. So how we were doing all of the holes, how we were doing the schematics for everything, and the plexiglass back, putting the switches on. Part 2 was then starting to get all of this wired up, so putting in all of the wiring for the LEDs, doing all of the wiring for the toggle switches, so both sides of the panels. Part 2, if you haven't seen that, you can get to by clicking on the link in the corner of the video right now. And then in part 2, we wired up all the north side of the station. Now I have all the south side of the station ready to actually wire into the layout. But what I'm also going to do now is do all of these LEDs as well. So I did a little bit more research, and my plan is still that I'm going to power that off the Frog. And so my idea here, I can try and find an LED that's hanging around. Let's try and move this out of the way. And it's kind of hard to try to hold it all in place, but you'd have one central wire that will be coming off the Frog. So if we kind of try and get that hanging out in there. I know how to do this when I'm watching it through the video as well. And then we will pick one of the LED legs over here, maybe like that. Now what you'll see is that the LED, if I hold it steady enough, everything's moving out the way now. And there we go. So the LEDs will light up when I hold that in place, and when you would flip the switch, that LED goes off because the Frog polarity changes, and you then have one of this other leg hooked up to the outer rail. So my idea, if we come over here, is that we would have positive coming into here from DCC negative power would come into here, and then this is then the Frog power coming in. And so as you would be flipping the point motor, that Frog polarity changes. So this then has either positive or negative that will run through it, and so one LED or the other LED then lights up accordingly. So I need to do a whole bunch of jumpers just so I can have a single DCC bus power for positive and negative, the same as I did here. So this is for the toggle switches. This is the common positive that comes from the capacitor discharge unit, which you can then see winding its way around all the back of the toggle switches. So I'm going to now do something similar here for all my DCC power, just to jumper all of these across. So that's going to be the first thing that I'm working on now, so I'll be right back.
So one thing that I've also been working on here is I've been wiring up the south side of the station, is starting to figure out these LEDs. So we have one of the LEDs up and running, and we also notice that it's kind of hanging, it's kind of floating in the air as if by magic. We have this frame underneath, so nothing is attached. Well, the frame is attached to the bench work, but the actual paneling itself isn't, so that's why it kind of wiggles around just a little bit. But we can now see that as we would flip the points one way or the other, and back to center, and then come back the other way, our point will fire. And if we come over here, this is the point that's actually moving in each direction. Why is it important? Why is it cool? And why am I doing all of this work here to do all of this, quite fancy paneling when the rest of the layout isn't really done? Well, there is a reason for this. If we back out, because of the way I have so many different points in place, and because I need to have all of the electrified frogs, I need to have everything hooked up and ready so that I could then have the panels in place that allows me to now switch things. And now that I've done that, I can now actually start to move trends around. So this class 58 can now come out of this little fret siding, and we can start to move on that fret bypass line, and that would swing around onto one of those lines, and it could happily go off and do whatever. I do have a couple of other class 43s and a city 125s in there. I've got this older executive ivory and I've also got Swallow Livery. Those two have been playing around. I've only got this one point hooked back up now. So most of the other frogs are electrified at this point, but I don't have any of the actual switching implants to be able to move them around. Just wanted to show you where we're at here. I did need to make some changes to the LEDs. I had said, on the workbench that it worked fine, and I was curious as to how it was going to be. Now it's on the back of the panel. One thing that I didn't take into account for, if we come in, we're dealing with number 16 here. This green one, there we go, pull that down a little bit. This green one is coming in from the frog. And my original idea was that I was going to have yellow and black that were coming in as the center legs from those LEDs, both running into here. So the idea is that we have the two LEDs that we're looking at, top and bottom, and as a refresher, black is running off to common positive right here. The other LED, we move out the way, we then have yellow all the way at the top here, runs off into here, which goes off to common negative. And the idea was that then the inside legs of those LEDs were then going to be running through and taking frog polarity. So as you would flip the turnout, you would then get either positive or negative, and that would light up one of the LEDs. The problem that I had, of course, is when I bring those two legs of the LEDs, inside legs of the LEDs together, and join them here, I was basically completing the circuit. So every single LED on the board was lighting up, because when I joined the two together, I'm now running positive and negative, and they would both line up. So what I've ended up having to do, if we can kind of scoot some of these wires out the way a little bit, is basically just split what comes off here. So we still have the single frog that comes in. We then have two wires that come out, and I need to clean this up. This was just very, very quickly done, just to figure out my annoyance as to why this wasn't working. But we're then going to have two coming out here, and they then go off to those inside legs of the LEDs, and that then works fine. As we would switch back and forth, you can see through the panel that LED changing as I flip that miniature toggle switch there. So I've got a whole bunch more still to do. I've got the rest of these frog polarity wiring to do out to all the LEDs now. I've now got 23 of those to go back and retrofit with more wiring, and then do heat shrinking and stuff like that. And I still then have the rest of the point motors on this south side of the station to get wired back in, and then actually attach all of these. So if we come down and see what we're looking at right now, all the blocks are just, this is the north side, all the blocks are just hanging out. That larger one in the center is going to be what's driving the LED, so it's just a whole mess. If we come back, just an absolute rat's nest of wires right now, as much as the back of the panel itself is fairly neat. I've now just got a whole slew of wires that are coming in the bottom, so I need to go back, try and do all of the LEDs, like I say, get all of those splits in place so that that works a little bit better. But at least for now, I'm happy that I can see real progress being made here as I switch back and forth. As the points move, as the trends start to move, as I can now get some of these HSTs moving, because one thing that I've also done is just very, very loosely, it's kind of odd with the sunlight, it's kind of dark, but I have very loosely put that in place, so I can now swing the HSTs all the way around here. I should have got some more of the points hooked up before I did this video, because like I say, I can't actually do that, because some of those points over on this north side station aren't quite in. But I'll be back in a few, a lot more wiring, so it'll actually be a few for you. It'll be quite a while for me. Be back soon.
Okay, so now we're back with somewhat working LEDs after I had done all that kind of jumper stuff. So there are 3 of the points that are the surface mounted points. So if we come over and actually, what I mean by that, I think I went over it in one of the previous clips. These are the Pico PL11 surface mounted points. They don't have the accessory switch that's on the bottom of the seats, PM1, so I can't switch the frog polarity. Because I am pulling off the frog polarity, and I haven't really cleaned up any of the cabling under here. Let's see if I can find an easy one that I can pull from. Maybe it's over here. So right around here, this is the frog wire, and then the other frog wire, a little kind of focus kind of problems. But there's another frog wire right here, this yellow one, and so I'm pulling off frog polarities all the way around. If you look carefully, I have got each of the frog polarities where I'm using those seeps point motors. I am then pulling off a feed. That feed, move around, that feed runs into this rear connector block here. And from that, I then run into my bank of LEDs here. So this is basically going to be sending either positive or negative power from the frog polarity depending on how the switch is thrown. That then drives through this bank of cables here into the LEDs, which is what we looked at before. That's why you've got the yellow and the black cables with the insulation around them. So that drives these LEDs. So there's only some of these LEDs that are working, and that's the one. Ignore everything on this side. I don't have any of the south side of the station hooked up. We're just focusing on the north side of the station here. So for example, this is a surface mounted point motor. This is one of the other surface mounted point motors. And then I believe this is a surface mounted point motor. But the operation is, as you flip the point each direction and come back to center with my capacitor discharge on it, as I flip the points each direction, the LED changes accordingly. So that's exactly what I was hoping I would end up getting to, and it is working just as I was wanting. And so now I've got good indication. I don't appear, so if we listen carefully, and there's kids playing in the yard next door, but listen carefully, maybe you go that way. The point is throwing, but that's one of those pico motors. And because I can't get frog polarity off it right now, those LEDs can't change. So all they're doing is just getting constant power off the bus. And that's okay. I'm going to be using frog juices, which I'm probably going to have another video on. Basically, the frog juices is constantly watching the polarity of the frog, and will then be watching the trends as it goes across that. And if I don't know exactly how it works, so maybe take this power with a pinch of salt until I get one and research a little bit more. But essentially, the frog juicer then watches a train as it will be passing onto the frog, and if the polarity is incorrect for what the train's expecting, it immediately switches to frog polarity. And this is meant to be, this is cycling hundreds of thousands of times a second, so literally a fraction of a second it'll detect the train, it'll flip the frog polarity, and the train will be able to carry on as normal. And so once I do that, then I will have frog polarity switching. And so that bank of connectors that we looked at underneath, let's come and look at it again just to show you. So it's the second bank. All of the LEDs are wired in, but if then you look on the top row, there are gaps for where I'm using those pico motors. So once the frog juices are in place, then the polarity will switch correctly. Then these LEDs will immediately start lighting up. A little bit different here, where I'm throwing both points together, and again the reason why the LEDs aren't quite working correctly is because one of those is using that surface mounted motor. A little bit of oddities over here, only one of the switches is working, so it will throw correctly, but only one of my switches is actually working. So I've got really odd behavior going on here as I switch back and forth. It's almost like this weird traffic light pattern. It's like, hey, pick what color LED that you want to be lighting up. So this one, I think it's this switch here. The switch itself throws fine, and you know, I'm getting some amount of changing, but you know, I don't know if it's the switch or if it's the seeps. I think the pin is starting to rotate like I had. That might not have been one that I'd tried to fix, but otherwise the behavior is quite correct. You know, other than needing to get frog polarity changing correctly here. The LEDs are doing what they should be doing. I at least get an indication as to what's happening. So I'm very happy with all of this working, other than these ones where I'm going to have to pay attention manually by watching until I get those frog juices. That's all great. On the south side, all the south side is now wired up as well, or at least the paneling is all wired up now. So all the south side paneling is wired up, and then here is all of that mess of cables. I do have some of these on the south side wired up as well. So this is some of the south side point motors that are all ready. I just need to then start actually running all those cables back. So hopefully the next clip will be the last clip. All the south side will be wired up the exact same way. I just again was needing to make sure that I had this correct with the LEDs after I had to split them all out. I didn't want to wire everything up until I knew that this was all working correctly. Now that I know it is, I can move over, do the south side. So hopefully I'll be back for you what's real soon. We've actually had over a week between the last clip you were watching and this one, and part of that was I just didn't have time to really get going. But this is a very time consuming process, especially on the back of the panel. I can move through wiring up the points onto the table fairly quickly, so hopefully I'll be back in just an hour or two real time for you in just a few seconds with the final part with all this panel ready to go. So be back soon. So this is now the panel all complete. As before, there are still a few lights here that aren't correctly giving their indications, just because I need those frog juices in place. But all of the south side of the station is now complete. So we can move around and flip these, and they'll all kind of move around correctly. So I'm very happy with how all this has ended up. I also then put screws and finishing washers in place. So if we come in close, it's basically just a washer that has recessed center part, so that as you screw through, the washer holds it in place, just because I didn't want to risk any damage on that laminate. Try and go underneath and we can see what a rat's nest it still ended up being. So this is now, here we go, this is what it ends up looking like underneath. There are some panels I have seen that are just works of art almost. This is not. This is somewhat neatly put together. I'll try and move a little bit more and lay right underneath it. Here we go. So it is somewhat put together, neat and tidily. In terms of everything is numbered. They all follow the same kind of color consistency with the pairs of wires that are coming through. From the switches, then colored will always be one particular contact, white will always be the other contact. LEDs will always follow the same kind of convention as well. So there is a lot going on under here just because of the amount of wires that come through. So I'm hoping that I don't have to come under here a whole lot. It's one of those things where you're always going to end up coming underneath and having to troubleshoot something. But I'm not really expecting any major additions. The only things that I will potentially be doing is these top rows of switches, the blue ones up in the top here. So there's one here, and then we've got another one over on that side. That's for those lighting controls around the station. They're going to be fairly easy because that should just be positive and negative coming in from those, and then you'll just toggle that on and off for the various different lighting functions around the station and the surrounding town. I've already got the connector blocks on the back of the panel there, so they should be fairly easy to actually get connected in. But otherwise all of this works. The frame itself, try and come back up, knock my drill over. The frame itself was pretty basic. It was just some additional trim that I had left from when I was doing the actual bench work itself. So I just angled this, I think it was 22.5 degrees, angled it down. I still need one piece in the middle just to support. You can see it sags just a little bit there. But otherwise that's pretty smooth. What I might end up doing is kind of a very thin finishing board that would run kind of all the way around the outside here, just to kind of make that neat and tidy. That's, you know, a long way down the road, and so I probably then do the same thing around here. I do need to relocate my actual DCC controller. I'm kind of torn on doing that, mainly because this is where I'm probably going to be running trains from for the most part. So out of this location, and I had thought about building a little extension shelf here, set the DCC controller on there. I may well still do that. I'm actually using a very basic Bachmann Easy Command controller at the moment. But I'm going to be moving over to probably the an NCE power cab, still DCC, but the NCE power cab, one of the local clubs, they actually have Digitrax controller on one layout. They have NCE on another one of the N-Track modular systems. I kind of prefer the NCE from what I've played with. The main reason why I'm looking at it is because they have a very slick USB interface board that then hooks straight into JMRI, which is a Java Model Railroad interface. So I'm planning on doing a little video series when I get to that stage, probably sometime in the fall here, another 2 or 3 months, where you can basically get a Raspberry Pi, download the image off the internet straight onto an SD card, and that then boots up and the whole thing's pre-configured with JMRI. It's pre-configured with the NCE power cab USB interface adapters. It sets itself up as a wireless hotspot, and so all you then do is on your phone is install a free application on your phone, hook that in. It can then pull straight off the NCE power cab, allow you to do throttle controls, function controls on your trains. JMRI actually gets way more advanced than that. You could have done all of this basically in a digital format. One of the club layouts, actually, they are playing with that with Panel Pro, where you basically design out your entire switching system. You have DCC decoders basically on your point motors. Again, I went with the SEEPs because they were cheap, and that did kind of bite me in some places. Compared to if I had gone for some of the Pico ones and bought that additional accessory switch. But there is a lot more JMRI can do. It can also then do block signaling, block detection, and then signaling. So I may well end up expanding out and doing more with JMRI, but at least at its most basic level, I want to be able to have some kind of wireless throttle control, just because as much as I'm going to have a panel here, and then if we would swing around to where my workbench is, this will actually end up becoming the tiny yard with an expansion layout. I'll then have another panel, not as big as this one I've just made for Newcastle Station, but I'll have another panel here that'll control the switching. And so I'll end up, you know, switching between the station and then switching between the yard. And I think that'll become a little bit cumbersome if I'm going to be using a tethered throttle. Like the Bachmann Easy Command, which is sitting right over here, or like the NC power cab or Digitrax or whatever. And I'm not really in a big enough space. I mean, this is 11 foot by 11 foot space, so the cost of doing like the wireless DCC controllers, again from either NC or Digitrax, to me just doesn't quite make sense. So I think it's about $35 for the USB interface for the NC or Digitrax. They're about the same, and then it would be about, you know, $40 or so to get a little Raspberry Pi and an SD card, install the image, and so for, you know, under $100 there, I have then got complete wireless control of my DCC infrastructure. I can really then just use a laptop and be able to plan out the actual program, the trains, the CVV codes on all the DCC decoders, things like that. So there's a lot of power to being able to do that from a laptop, rather than having to plug it in, program it out through one of the controllers. So like I say, I'm very happy with how all this has ended up turning out. I just need those frog juices for some of those surface mounted points, just so that I can then have the frog polarity switching correctly, and so that I could then get those last few lights that will show up correctly. And again, otherwise, I'm very happy with just the basic electronics. here, being able to control it all. Hopefully I don't have, not going back the other way. Odd. There we go. Not quite sure why that one was sticking. So there are still going to be some teething troubles. I know that at least one of these points over here, one of the first 3 or 4 I originally put in, I believe it's this one, that was having a problem with that rod that comes through the middle on the SEEPS PM1. That wasn't one that I had originally fixed. I need to come back and fix that. The wiring is fine, it does throw, but the point motor itself does not. So that's a little disappointing. But anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this this rather long 3-part series on building out this panel. Again, if you want to see where it all started, then you've got the first video where I went and actually built this front face panel itself, how I did that, how we got the holes, and laminating it, you know, the base, the plexiglass base underneath it. Part 2 was then when I started doing all of the wiring on the back of the board and doing figuring out the LEDs and things like that. So do go back through and look at those. Hopefully it's also inspired you a little bit as well. There's a lot of YouTube channels that I follow. Some of the big ones like Everard Junction, although he tore his down, is looking at rebuilding. Things like Dave Flash 47. But also then some of the slightly smaller channels that are still going through and doing some real fun parts of their build. So things like Barnabas Junction. I'm enjoying that an awful lot. So it is fun to, you know, get inspiration from other channels. Hopefully sharing out a little bit of what I'm doing so you get an idea along the same lines of what other people are doing or what you could be doing on your own layout. So please do leave comments, like the videos. It is always fun when I see people that are leaving messages. Subscribe to the channel as well so you can follow along. Now that I've got the bulk of this doing, and one of the reasons why I really want to get this done is we've got all of these trends that are just kind of hanging out, all the locos there. I've got more over here. I've got another class 43 hanging out there. I've then got a class 91. I've got a couple of DCC decoders still to put in some of these locos, but otherwise I've now got a lot of trains that are all just kind of hanging out that are ready to go, but it had all largely been waiting on this, because until I had all of these points hooked up, electrified for the most part, electrofrogs working, switching polarities, you know, it was almost impossible to run trains because there is no way you can move trains around here until I started to get this electrified. So now, hopefully, you know, 4 or 5 months after I started doing this build and started doing some YouTube videos, I can now actually for real get into planning out the station here, starting to do some of the buildings. Platforms are probably going to be the first one that I'm going to be working out, as I think that's going to be really starting to make it pop to life, you know, because I've got, if we come up high, all of these curved platforms that Newcastle station itself does, figuring out where the main platform's going to be, where are the ones that will come out just with canopies on, where's the actual curved roofing going to be. There's a big bridge that runs through the middle. So there's a lot of really fun things that are going to be coming up now on the channel as I actually get stuck into building the station. Hopefully it starts to look more than just a whole bunch of plywood baseboards. So yeah, do subscribe, follow along, please do share out. One thing that has been nice, like I say, is hearing from other people, getting a little bit of inspiration, a little bit of motivation. You know, so do reach out and, you know, let other people know that you're enjoying their work. It can be kind of very much a solo thing. That's why I go to a local club, just to try and hang out with people that have got a similar passion. YouTube is a great way of being able to share that passion with other people. It still can be kind of lonely, especially when, you know, I'm out in the US and I'm doing predominantly double low gauge British Rail, Hornby and Lima stuff. There's not really many people out here that are doing this, so the YouTube is a great way for me to be able to keep in touch. So do reach out to others that you're watching. You know, give them some motivation, thank them for what they're doing, give them some suggestions on their layouts as to what might work well. You know, just kind of share the love and pass it forward. So thanks for watching. Stay tuned. We'll be back soon in another couple of weeks once I move on to something else. And hopefully you've enjoyed this 3-part series on building a switch panel. Thanks. Bye-bye.